First of all, congratulations to you on your historic election to the position of Commissioner for Infrastructure and Energy of the AU. Can you please say 2 to 3 areas that you are going to focus on when you're working in this commission in the next years, in the coming years?
No, thank you very much. I think coming into the role, I articulated 3 areas that I want to have the commission, the office focus on. One is the revitalization of Africa's industrial renaissance. And within that, there'll be focus on strategic projects that we drive, and mobilization of finance. The second area was about focusing on the transformation of Africa. And that will entail how we also position, domestic companies of African descent in the projects that we deliver on, and also how we position African financing. I think African financing becomes quite critical in this role. And then the third area is also around contributing to building a capable African Union. So that is more inward looking about how do we improve and make sure that the organization is left in a better place, capacity, skills, delivery, reputation, knowledge generation, etc. So I think throughout the term, these 3 focus areas, of course the different instruments under each will change and be impacted by the different partnerships. But I think as key themes, we must make sure that we revitalize industrialization of the continent, that we build a capable African Union, and we transform African economy and have Africans participate in their own development.
Yeah. Just now you mentioned 3 areas. It's the 3 Ds you mentioned in your presentation, right?
Yes. So additional to that, I think those 3 areas will have to be impacted by the 3 Ds that we talk about: yes. Decarbonization, digitization, and diversification of the African economy. I think the whole world is confronted by the 3 Ds.
Yes.
Everybody's decarbonizing, although Africa is not a big contributor in terms of carbon emissions, etc. We are, I would argue, the most impacted. Floods, drought, the impact of climate change. So we cannot divorce ourselves from the decarbonization agenda and conversation. And I think what makes the African continent strategic in that conversation is that a number of the green technologies required by the world to transition require Africa's minerals, rare earth minerals, critical minerals, etc. So how do we then position the African continent as a strategic contributor to the green technologies agenda? So it's not just about being the taker of the rules of decarbonizing, but it's about also being part of the rule setter, if you will, leveraging our resource endowment. So that is why it becomes important that Africa defines Africa's voice in the decarbonization conversation that is anchored by our endowments of minerals and human resources, because we do also have professionals all over the world of African descent that can play a role. So that's the one. On the issue of diversification, I think we still have a lot of work to do to diversify the African economy from just being, a commodity-based economy, from just being an exporter of raw materials. We want to get to the point where we add more value to all of our resources on the continent. That is still the priority. It's been a priority for many years, and I think the issue is we don't have time anymore. So we need to get it done. And working with our partners from all over the world, China included, is about how do we build value and diversify the African economy and add value at source, as it were. That's the one. And of course, the digitization agenda is linked to the 2. The more we diversify and when we decarbonize, we have to now, again, engage in partners like yourselves that are already far in the digitization landscape. How do we also join with the rest of the world in digitizing Africa?
Yeah, that's good. During your election presentation, you mentioned that Africa's most pressing challenge is, the quote, is the chronic infrastructure deficit. Why do you think the private sector participation is very important to improve the infrastructure in Africa?
We certainly need private sector participation because the deficit is quite high. The calculations are saying that we would need about 340 billion US dollars by 2040 just to bridge the gap of infrastructure. Right now, collectively as Africa, we've managed to raise about 82 billion. So there's a big funding gap that remains. And that funding gap has to really address deep infrastructure deficit issues. We've got 600 million Africans with no electricity, for example. So that says to you that there's huge need for energy infrastructure on the continent. We have only 25% of Africa with broadband penetration. So you can imagine, insofar as, internet technology and the digital technologies that we require, there's a big gap there. So we can name all the different areas of infrastructure. The deficit is quite high. Certainly, it cannot only be bridged by governments, right? We need partnerships, and that's where private sector becomes critical. So the question then becomes, how do we make sure that we have bankable projects that private sector can want to participate in? How do we balance development and affordability and the profit that private sector wants to make? So those are the balancing acts that we would need to confront in this area, in this agenda, so that we make sure that there is private sector participation, particularly African private sector, partnering where we have gaps with our global partners, like China, as it were.
Yeah. When you mention the private sector, actually you means private sectors around the world?
Yes.
Okay.
We'll need private sector around the world.
Oh, like
Absolutely.
International cooperation.
Absolutely,
right?
absolutely.
Okay. Yeah, the China's Belt and Road Initiative focuses on enhancing the infrastructure interconnectivity among the world countries. And many African countries also participated in this initiative. Will AU further strengthen cooperation with China in building and upgrading the continent's infrastructure?
No, certainly. I think the infrastructure deficit that we have makes it important that we maintain and strengthen partnerships all over the world. So certainly the partnership with China will be critical, just as we'll be strengthening partnerships with other parts of the world, whether it's the European Union, the global south broadly, etc. But we do recognize that China has played quite an important role in the infrastructure delivery on the continent. So it's about how do we strengthen that, how do we improve upon that, how do we learn lessons from that partnership on what has worked and what has not worked, and make it a better partnership for the future. So that's going to be very important. I think China will remain strategic to us, but we need to maintain the review of our relationship to say, in delivering this infrastructure agenda, what can we learn, what can we do better? But certainly we'll maintain that relationship with China.
Currently there are some Chinese companies, they are doing the infrastructure development delivery in South Africa. They are building roads, expressways, and bridges under the Belt and Road Initiative. How do you comment on their performances?
Look, we always welcome contribution to infrastructure development. But as I say, there's always a need. Each project has its own merits, right? There's always a need to have your monitoring and evaluation process so that you can learn lessons on what has worked and what has not worked. I think a blanket view that says this is the performance of Chinese participants would be not fair, because each one has to be based on each project delivered. So I think one thing that I would want to look at once in the role also is how do we monitor and evaluate the different projects with the partners for improvement, so that we can improve and do things better. So because I haven't directly monitored or evaluated any of those projects yet, I think as a principle is to say we welcome the partnership, but let's also look at what works and improve upon it.
Okay. Yeah, thank you very much. And also about a question about energy. China is in the leading position in the renewable energy development, like solar and wind power generation or some photovoltaic panel production, turbine production. What are your views on China's role in improving African countries' electric power supply through international cooperation?
Oh, China has an important role to play in partnering with us. I think it's really to also contribute to harnessing Africa's own potential. I think 60% of sunlight, as I say, in terms of capacity and capability, would be on the African continent. Similarly, wind, hydro, etc. So the missing link is the technologies you need to harness that natural endowment. And China's contribution to an investment in your own research and development has been quite critical. So I think the world can benefit from that research and development that China has invested in for the technologies, and to partner then with particularly with Africa. We would welcome that partnership. But as with every partnership, I think we are always looking for a win-win cooperation. And I think what is encouraging is that those are the principles that China has advanced to say that let's find balance and win-win. And we will be happy to collaborate with our Chinese compatriots in that regard.
Yeah, now in the African continent, the development is not even. South Africa, the position is quite high, but there are some African countries, they are, the power generation is quite low. Do you think there are some solutions to change this?
There are certainly solutions to changes. I think we are increasingly going to be confronted with finding, new solutions, off-grid solutions, for example. You mentioned the capabilities of China, solar generation, etc. That's where some of the off-grid solutions can come from, because a lot of African countries have rural areas where there's too wide distances between communities. So large grids won't necessarily work. So you would need to have agile off-grid solutions. And that is when our conversations with partners like China, who have done the same based on your vast land mass, but you managed to bridge that. How do we learn from each other? How do we leverage your experience and how you managed to electrify China? And we do the same with the African continent. So yes, we're going to have to find creative solutions. The traditional solutions won't necessarily all work. Yeah.
Thank you very much. And you mentioned that in terms of the infrastructure, you mentioned that, quote, we still consume what we do not produce and produce what we do not consume, end quote. How did this happen? And do you have any plans to change this? For
sure. The current problem that Africa has is the fact that we still have colonial model of infrastructure planning.
Colonial?
Yes. So from the colonial days, the infrastructure was planned that it moves from the nearest resource base, whether it's agricultural resource or mineral resource, outward to the nearest port out of the continent. Right? So if you do an aerial map of Africa, whether it's rail connectivity, road connectivity, it's literally from the nearest source out. Very little interconnecting infrastructure that connects African countries between themselves. And that has had an impact in our levels of intra-Africa trade. We are trading very little with each other because we don't have the connecting infrastructure. Again, infrastructure gap that we have to bridge. We don't have the connecting infrastructure. And similar link to that also, it's about having the infrastructure that boosts manufacturing on the continent. So maintaining that colonial model of infrastructure planning has an impact on our ability to produce what we consume. So what we end up doing as a continent is we export raw materials, whether it's minerals or agriculture, and import beneficiated and value-added products that we consume. So there's no beneficiation on the continent, very little beneficiation on the continent. We contribute only 2% to global manufacturing, for example, as a whole continent.
Yeah.
So you can imagine how we need to leapfrog, how we need to catch up very quickly. So the priority then is to say, we need to make sure that we electrify the continent, because you can't do anything without energy. If you do not have energy, you cannot build manufacturing capacity. You cannot even begin to plan a smelter. You know, and you cannot participate in the beneficiation conversation because you don't have the energy to do that. So powering Africa is very important. Yeah. And the next priority will be the interconnectivity, the interconnecting infrastructure that we need to build through railroad, you know, even maritime, that connects the continent within itself. So we can begin to trade with intra-African products and consume African products as best as possible, while of course still maintaining trade relations with the rest of the world, but we have to start consuming African products. So when we say that we continue to produce what we don't consume and consume what we don't produce, is because we need to deal with the foundational issues of interconnectivity, energy, and infrastructure planning that connects us.
Yeah, that's very important.
Yeah.
Yeah. And you know, the principle of the Belt and Road Initiative is extensive consultation, joint contribution, and shared benefits. That means before we build some projects, we consulted, we talk, we negotiated with each other. Do you think this can help change this situation?
Absolutely, absolutely. And I think those principles are the principles that resonate with us. Those are the principles we want to advance. As Africans, the consultation with our partners, the win-win, because within that really it's about China saying that, you know, as a partner, you are looking for the win-win solution. That's why the consultation, etc. So those are principles that we want to maintain in the partnership. So as we move forward and strengthen the partnership, whether it's through FOCAC or any other platform, we're quite pleased with maintaining that as the centerpiece of China's partnership with Africa.
Okay, thank you very much. I have the last question.
Sure.
G20 will be held in South Africa maybe in November or around there. What does this mean to African continents, and what opportunities will it bring to the continent?
The G20 platform is quite an important platform, and we are looking to put at the center of South Africa's presidency the Africa's agenda. Yeah. And you can imagine that the infrastructure agenda and energy agenda is a big one for Africa based on the deficit that we have. And there's no better grouping than the G20 members, all of them coming in one place for us to begin to have those conversations, mobilize partnerships, mobilize financing. So we are looking to use that part of the sessions to engage on some of the energy and infrastructure areas of the continent, and, you know, mobilize partners to step up and hold hands with us to bridge the deficit. So we will be having some platforms that deal with presenting the infrastructure and energy projects to the G20 membership for further partnerships. Yeah.
Okay, thank you very much.
I'd like to ask you a question more specific.
Sure.
On the energy issue. Actually, you know, South Africa is facing the challenge of the power shortage and the environmental pollution caused by waste. China is good at waste incineration for power generation. And whatever the technology on the capacity of the construction. And my question is it possible to build a model project based on waste to power technology by two countries, and under your leadership as a AU's senior leader, and then we use this model to promote to the whole continent?
No, I think we're always looking at best practice. I think the principle here is always making sure that, you know, we learn from best practice. So if China's model of waste to power is cutting edge in the industry, certainly would welcome that partnership. So I think that the core principle is the best practice model. And we're always looking to partner with different countries and different partners based on the different models of best practice. So we are certainly looking forward to assessing that further and seeing how we can learn from it and roll it out through the continent as well.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you. Sure.
Yes.